In 1999, a father and his 12-year-old daughter walked into the 7th Precinct Police Station in Brookhaven. They were there for protection. Raymond Hale was set to testify against a powerful union boss. The cameras caught them entering the lobby at 9:14 p.m., but after that, nothing. No paperwork, no exit footage, no trace. They called it the Hale Disappearance. For 26 years, the case has remained unsolved. 2 lives erased inside a building meant to protect them. Some say the mob got to them. Others whisper it was an inside job, a cover-up buried in blue uniforms and silence. If you're drawn to stories of long unsolved disappearances, disturbing discoveries, and buried secrets resurfacing decades later, subscribe, because what you're about to hear will change the way you look at justice. Forever. The tape began with a hiss. Detective Lina Ward adjusted the volume knob on the battered VCR as the grainy footage rolled across the monitor. The timestamp flickered. March 18th, 1999. 2 figures came into view. A man in a raincoat, tall, mid-40s, with a tired set to his shoulders. Beside him, a girl, no older than 12, clutching his hand like it was the only tether she had. Her long hair was damp, plastered against her cheek. Raymond and Emily Hale. They walked through the precinct's lobby doors at 9:14 p.m., escorted by a uniformed officer who kept his face turned from the camera. The 3 paused at the front desk. Papers shuffled, a pen scratched. Then the officer guided them toward the west hallway, toward the interrogation rooms. The tape cut to static. Lina sat back in her chair. She had watched this recording a dozen times since pulling it from the evidence vault 2 weeks ago, each time hoping something new might surface. A flicker, a reflection, a clue she'd missed. But the footage ended the same way. Silence, then snow. Raymond and Emily had vanished. Not just from the station, from the city, the state, maybe the earth itself. The official story filed in '99 was thin. Raymond, a construction foreman, had agreed to testify against a local union boss accused of laundering money through city contracts. He had brought Emily with him that night because his wife, already ill, bedridden, couldn't keep her safe at home. But the testimony never came. The file closed with 2 words stamped across the last page: missing persons. Lina leaned forward again, elbows on her knees, eyes fixed on the snowstorm of dead pixels on the screen. She had lived in this city long enough to know what missing often meant. But something about the Hale case gnawed at her in a way others didn't. Maybe it was the girl's face, pale, wary, her gaze darting around the lobby as if she already sensed the danger. Maybe it was the fact that every officer who had been on shift that night gave contradictory statements. Or maybe it was what she had found buried deep in the archive. A second report, unsigned, claiming Raymond Hale had never checked in at the front desk at all. 2 reports, 2 realities, 1 missing family. The more she dug, the more she smelled the stink of rot. The station where Raymond and Emily vanished had since been renovated, its interrogation rooms painted over, its halls brightened with fluorescent light. But bricks remember what paper forgets. And some of the men who wore the badge back then were still alive, still walking free, still silent. Lina closed her notebook, the scrawl of her latest questions bleeding into the margins. She checked the clock on the wall. Midnight. She'd lost hours again. Outside, rain tapped against the station windows, as steady as a ticking clock. For 26 years, the Hale case had gathered dust. Now files were resurfacing, witnesses were cracking, and one by one, the people who had locked the truth away were finding themselves unable to sleep at night. Because secrets never die. They just wait. The rain had not let up by morning. A pale sun tried to burn through the clouds but failed, leaving the city washed in a gray so flat it seemed drained of time itself. Detective Lina Ward sat in her unmarked car across from the old 7th Precinct, windshield wipers groaning as they cleared another sheet of drizzle. The building stood like a monument to forgotten promises. Once a proud fortress of law and order, the precinct had long been replaced by a sleek, glass-paneled headquarters uptown. Now it was nothing but a hollowed husk, leased to storage companies and the occasional film crew that wanted gritty realism. Its windows were boarded, the stone walls streaked with grime. But Lina wasn't looking at the building. She was looking at the memory of a night 26 years ago, trapped forever on magnetic tape. A man and a girl stepping inside those doors, never to come back out. She drew a slow breath, reached into her coat pocket, and pulled out a photo. Raymond Hale, his expression stern but not unkind, next to a younger Emily, gap-toothed and smiling, her hair in crooked braids. Someone had snapped it in a backyard, sunlight flashing off a metal swing set behind them. The kind of picture that should have been tucked in a family album, not an evidence folder. Lina slid the photo back into her notebook. She had been a child herself when the Hales vanished. For her, the case was just a whisper in the city's rumor mill, a warning parents used when kids lingered too long on the streets. Don't end up like that poor girl and her dad. Now, as an investigator in the Major Crimes Review Unit, Lina had pulled the file again, part of an initiative to close cold cases. She told herself it was just another job, but deep down she knew she had crossed the line into obsession. The car clock read 8:46 a.m. She checked her notes. Today, she wasn't here to stare at a boarded-up building. She was here to talk to someone who had been inside that night. Her first stop, retired Sergeant Thomas Greaves. Greaves lived in a squat brick duplex on the city's east side, the kind of neighborhood where curtains stayed drawn, even at noon. Lina rang the buzzer, heard the echo of movement inside, then the metallic scrape of locks. The man who answered the door looked older than his 64 years. His shoulders sagged, his gut pressed against a flannel shirt, and his eyes, gray and bloodshot, studied her with suspicion. "Detective Ward?" he rasped. His voice carried the gravel of too many years of cigarettes. "That's right," Lina said, flashing her badge. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Sergeant." He gave a dry chuckle. "Haven't been a sergeant for a long time. Come in." The living room smelled faintly of whiskey and dust. A muted TV played a morning news program while unopened mail piled on the coffee table. Greaves gestured to a chair, then lowered himself into his recliner with a grunt. "So," he said, "this about the Hales?" Lina nodded. "I'm reviewing the case. There are a few inconsistencies in the reports from that night. I was hoping you could help me clarify them." Greaves's jaw tightened. "Inconsistencies, huh? That's one way to put it. You were on duty the night Raymond and Emily came in?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah, I was in the bullpen when they walked through. I remember because it was late, close to the end of shift, and because—" He trailed off, rubbing his temple. "Because the girl looked scared out of her skin." Lina leaned forward. "Scared of who?" Greaves's eyes flicked toward the TV, as if searching for an escape. "Hard to say. The whole place felt tense that night. You could cut the air with a knife. There were guys whispering in corners. The captain had shut himself in his office. Not normal for a routine witness escort." "What happened after they arrived?" Lina asked. "They were taken down the hall. Interrogation room 3. Officer Dwyer walked them there. After that..." He shook his head. "It gets fuzzy." "Fuzzy how?" "I never saw them leave, and that's the thing. People come in, people go out. You notice. But I remember looking up an hour later and they were just gone." Lina scribbled notes. "And you didn't file a statement about that?" His lips curled into a bitter smile. "You think they wanted me to? Look, Ward, I don't know how much you've read, but that precinct was rotten back then. We all knew it. The brass had their favorites, their untouchables. If you asked the wrong questions, Suddenly your shift got changed, your desk got moved to the basement, or worse. So you stayed quiet. I stayed alive. The silence that followed pressed heavy between them. Outside, a car horn blared, then faded. Do you know who might have had reason to silence Raymond Hale? Lina asked. Greaves stared at her for a long time before answering. Raymond was set to testify against Vincent DeLuca. You know the name? Lina did. DeLuca was a union boss with fingers in half the city's construction contracts during the 90s. He had been indicted twice, acquitted twice. Both cases had collapsed when key witnesses backed out or disappeared. You think DeLuca had something to do with it? She asked. Greaves shrugged. Wouldn't surprise me, but here's the part that's always bugged me. If it was DeLuca's men, why do it inside a police station? Why not grab Hale off the street? Make it look random. Why walk him and his kid into a place crawling with uniforms, then erase them? The question hung in the room like smoke. Lina closed her notebook slowly. Maybe because the uniforms weren't the problem. For the first time, Greaves met her eyes directly. His gaze was sharp, haunted. Careful, detective. You start pulling at those threads, you'll find they're still knotted to people who wear badges today. Lina stood. Thank you for your time. At the door, Greaves called after her. Ward, if you're smart, you'll let the dead stay buried. She stepped out into the drizzle, heart thudding, his words echoing like a warning bell. The drive back to the station took her through streets that hadn't changed much since 1999. Corner bodegas with fading signs, rows of brownstones with chipped stoops, murals half covered by graffiti. At a red light, Lina pulled out her notebook and flipped to the timeline she'd been constructing. 9:14 p.m. Raymond and Emily Hale enter the precinct, escorted by Officer Dwyer, taken to Interrogation Room 3. No official record of exit. Sergeant Greaves recalls tension, unusual atmosphere. Hale set to testify against DeLuca. She tapped the pen against the paper. What gnawed at her most was the contradiction. The official report stated Hale never checked in, yet the video clearly showed otherwise. Two narratives. Which one had the department chosen to stand by? The light turned green. She drove on, but her mind was already several steps ahead. If she wanted answers, she needed to find Officer Dwyer, the last man to see Raymond and Emily alive. And she needed to find him fast, before anyone realized the case was being stirred up again. By late afternoon, Lina sat in the archives of major crimes, the hum of fluorescent bulbs overhead. Boxes towered on metal shelves, labeled with fading markers. She had requested Dwyer's personnel file, and the clerk, an old man with shaky hands, had reluctantly wheeled it out. Inside, she found what she expected: commendations, disciplinary warnings, transfers. Dwyer had left the force in 2002, 3 years after the Hales vanished. Official reason: medical retirement. Unofficially, the whispers pointed to alcoholism, erratic behavior, debts owed to the wrong people. An address was listed in the back of the file. Lina copied it down, her pulse quickening. She shut the box, slid it back across the counter. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Detective Ward? A voice rasped, low and strained. Yes. Who's this? A pause, then, You don't know me. But I know what happened to the Hales. They didn't walk out because they were never meant to. Her grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? The line went dead. Lina stared at the black screen, her reflection staring back. For the first time, she felt the icy certainty that she wasn't just chasing a cold case. She was being pulled into a story that was still alive. And watching her every move. When Lina stepped back outside, the evening air hit her like a shock. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the street damp and quiet. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had confirmation now, or at least the fragile testimony of a broken man. The Hales hadn't simply vanished. They had been erased with the help of the very people sworn to protect them. But testimony wasn't evidence. And without evidence, all she had was the word of a disgraced ex-cop against the silence of an entire department. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She answered, pulse racing. The voice was the same one she'd heard earlier, low, deliberate. "You're asking questions that got better people than you buried." "Who are you?" Lila demanded. "You want answers? Start with the basement, 7th precinct, room below the room." The line went dead. Lila lowered the phone slowly, the words echoing in her head. A hidden basement. A place not on the blueprints. She looked back at Dwyer's duplex. The curtains had fallen still again. The house, a tomb of secrets. She knew what she had to do next. The old 7th precinct loomed darker at night. Lena returned after midnight, parking half a block away. The boarded windows stared back like blind eyes, the walls slick with rain. She pulled her flashlight from the glove box, checked her recorder, and slipped on a pair of gloves. She wasn't supposed to be here. Officially, the building was condemned. But if there was truth buried inside, she wasn't going to wait for paperwork. The lock on the side door was rusted, weak. She jimmied it open and stepped inside. The air was thick with mildew. Her flashlight beam cut through dust motes as she moved down the corridor. Faded signs still pointed toward the old holding cells, the interrogation wing. Every step seemed to echo louder than it should have. At the end of the hallway, she found the door marked Interrogation 3. The paint was peeling, the wood splintered. She pushed it open. The room was empty, a table, 2 chairs, a cracked mirror. But something felt wrong. The floor under her boots didn't sound like solid concrete. It sounded hollow. She crouched, running her fingers across the tiles. One shifted slightly under pressure. Her heart kicked against her ribs. She pried it up. Beneath it, darkness yawned. A square cut into the floor, leading down into a void. A hidden staircase. Her flashlight beam trembled as she aimed it into the pit. Rusted steps descended into shadows, disappearing into a black that seemed endless. Lena swallowed hard. The basement was real, and whatever had happened to Raymond and Emily Hale, the answers were waiting below. The first step groaned beneath Lena's weight. The sound cracked through the silence like a warning. She paused, tightening her grip on the flashlight. Dust drifted in the air, disturbed by her movement, the particles shimmering as they fell into the void below. The staircase was narrow, boxed in by damp concrete walls. She lowered herself carefully, one hand on the rail, her boots scraping against rusted metal. Each step seemed to echo for miles. Halfway down, the stench hit her, a sour mix of mildew, rust, and something sharper underneath, something metallic. The basement wasn't on any blueprint she'd ever seen. No mention of sub-levels in the renovation records, no architectural plans archived in City Hall. This place had been built for a purpose, and that purpose wasn't justice. At the bottom, her beam swept across the floor. The space was wider than she expected, more like a bunker than a basement. Thick pillars rose from cracked cement, their surfaces scarred with graffiti and old water stains. And in the center of the room, a chair, metal, bolted to the floor. Its paint had flaked away, revealing rusted steel beneath. Restraint cuffs still dangled from the armrests, their chains clinking softly when the draft shifted. Lena's throat went dry. She circled the chair slowly, her flashlight shaking despite her efforts to steady it. The ground around it was stained, dark patches that had seeped deep into the concrete. She crouched, running a gloved finger across the stain. It came up black, tacky even after decades. Blood. The air seemed heavier now, pressing in around her as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She forced herself to keep moving, sweeping her beam across the rest of the space. Along one wall stood a row of lockers, dented and rusting. She tugged one open. Inside lay a faded jacket, sleeves stiff with dried residue. The badge sewn onto the chest read, 7th Precinct Auxiliary. Her heart sank. Evidence of an off-the-books holding area was bad enough. Evidence that it was sanctioned by the department, or at least tolerated, was worse. Something caught her eye on the far wall. A patch of brickwork, discolored compared to the rest. She stepped closer, tracing the outline with her hand. The mortar was different, newer. Someone had sealed something here. Her flashlight found a set of tools left in the corner, a crowbar among them. She set down her notebook, wedged the bar into the cracks, and pulled. The first brick clattered to the ground, sending dust billowing. She worked fast, her muscles straining, until an opening yawned wide enough for her beam to slip through. The light revealed a small recess, and inside, crumpled on the ground, was a shoe. Children's size. Her breath hitched. She reached in, pulling it free. The fabric was brittle, the laces frayed, but the design was unmistakable. White canvas with faded blue stripes. A girl's sneaker. Lena sat back hard on the cold concrete, the shoe dangling from her hand. Her chest constricted, every sound amplified. The drip of water from the ceiling, the faint hum of traffic above. Emily. The weight of it nearly crushed her. This wasn't rumor, wasn't theory. This was proof that the Hales had been here. Proof they hadn't simply walked out into the night. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She shoved the shoe into an evidence bag, sealing it quickly, her hands trembling. Then, a noise. Soft, deliberate. A scuff of movement in the darkness behind her. Lena froze. Slowly, she turned the flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught the far corner, just for a second, enough to see the edge of a shadow disappearing up the staircase. Someone else was here. By the time she reached the top, the door was swinging shut. She burst into the hallway, sweeping her light across peeling paint and broken tiles, but the corridor was empty. Her pulse raced as she sprinted toward the exit. Outside, the night pressed in heavy and wet. The street was silent except for the distant rumble of a train. Whoever had been watching was gone, but they had been there, and they had seen her. Back in her car, Lena locked the doors and sat in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles whitened. The sneaker lay sealed in the evidence bag beside her, a fragile relic of a girl whose laughter had been silenced before her time. She forced herself to breathe, to think. Someone had gone to great lengths to bury the truth of the Hales' disappearance. A hidden basement, sealed walls, altered reports. And now, someone was still guarding those secrets. Watching, waiting, ensuring no one pulled too hard at the thread. But she had already pulled. The shoe wasn't enough to prove murder in court, not after 26 years, but it was enough to prove the official record a lie. Enough to shake loose the first stone in the wall of silence. She started the engine. The next step was clear. She needed answers from the man who had run the precinct in 1999, Captain Rourke. Lena found him 3 days later, living in a retirement community on the outskirts of the city. The complex was tidy, manicured lawns and flower beds masking the frailty of its residents. She signed in at the front desk, was led down a hall lined with pastel wallpaper and framed prints of sailboats. Rourke's room was near the end. When he opened the door, Lena almost didn't recognize him. Time had shrunk him, bent his shoulders, softened his face into folds, but his eyes, sharp, pale, calculating, were unchanged. "Detective Ward," he said smoothly, as if expecting her. "Come in." The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and aftershave. A chessboard sat on the table, pieces mid-game. "I heard you've been revisiting old ghosts," Rourke said, lowering himself into a chair. "Hale." His daughter Lena studied him carefully. "You knew I'd come. I knew someone would eventually. Secrets like that, they have a half-life. You can bury them, but decay brings them back up. Her pulse quickened. Then you admit something happened to them. He chuckled, dry as paper. You're too young to remember how things were. The city was bleeding. Crime, corruption, politics. It all bled together. Men like DeLuca were parasites. Hale wanted to cut him open in court, and parasites don't die easy. So you protected DeLuca, Lina pressed. Protected? He leaned forward, his smile thin. We managed him. The precinct wasn't just about law, it was about balance. Too much disruption, and the city tears itself apart. Sometimes you sacrifice pawns to keep the board stable. Her stomach turned. Raymond Hale was a witness, not a pawn. His daughter was 12. Rourke's gaze flicked to her notebook, then back to her eyes. Careful, detective. If you're carrying evidence, if you've already found what I think you have, you're a target now. And targets don't live long. The words struck like ice. You're admitting to a crime, she said quietly. He smiled again, thin as a razor. I'm admitting to survival. There's a difference. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of a wall clock. Lena rose, her notebook clutched tight. This isn't over, Captain. His laughter followed her into the hall. No, detective, it never was. That night, Lena sat at her desk, the sneaker under a lamp, its faded stripes glowing pale in the light. She listened to the rain tapping the window, every drop echoing with the weight of memory. She knew now. The Hales hadn't been victims of chance. They had been sacrificed, erased, their disappearance orchestrated from within. And if she wanted to bring the truth to light, she would have to tear down the walls brick by brick, even if the foundation crumbled beneath her. But as she closed her notebook, one thought gnawed at her worse than all the rest. If Raymond and Emily had been killed that night, why had someone sealed only one shoe in the wall? The missing shoe haunted her. Lena couldn't shake it, couldn't file it away with the other notes and photos stacked in her case folder. Every time she looked at the evidence bag on her desk, the thought nagged. Where was the other one? Children didn't just lose one shoe and keep walking. If Emily's sneaker had been hidden in the basement wall, then someone had taken care to conceal it, which meant there had been two, which meant whoever sealed that cavity had made a choice. Why hide one? And why leave the other unaccounted for? She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion dragging at her. Outside her window, the city lights blinked against the drizzle, a constellation of stories buried and forgotten. She thumbed through the old file photos again, stopping at one that showed Emily sitting on her father's shoulders at a summer fair. Both shoes visible. White canvas, blue stripes. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unlisted number. You're not ready for what's missing. Her pulse jolted. She typed back fast. Who is this? No reply. The screen stayed black, reflecting her own pale face. The next morning she drove to the archives again, asking for the property logs from 1999. The clerk, grumbling at the early hour, wheeled out another stack of boxes. Most of the logs were routine, wallets, watches, knives, phones. But halfway through she froze. A line item dated March 18th, 1999. Child's shoe, canvas, white/blue. Turned over to evidence. Her stomach dropped. There it was, proof the second shoe had once been logged. But the tag ended abruptly. No case number, no signature, no chain of custody. It had simply been recorded, and then it vanished. She snapped photos of the page, each click of her phone camera a sharp crack in the silence. The shoe had been in evidence once. Someone had removed it. Someone with access. By noon, she was driving across the river to visit retired Detective Paul Vargas. His name had appeared repeatedly in the Hale file, the officer assigned to catalog property that night. Vargas had left the force in 2005, moved out to the suburbs. His house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, A trimmed lawn and neat garden beds disguising what Lina suspected was a man carrying decades of weight. He opened the door before she could knock twice. He was heavyset, balding, with a face creased deep by sun and age. His eyes narrowed when she introduced herself. "You're here about Hale," he said flatly. "You knew I'd come?" He sighed, rubbing his jaw. "I knew someone would eventually. Been waiting 20 years for it. Come on." Inside, the house smelled of coffee and motor oil. Vargas led her to a garage converted into a workshop. Tools hung in neat rows, and an old Harley gleamed in the corner. "I remember the shoe," he said without prompting. "The second one. Came in with the rest of the property that night. I logged it. Or tried to." "What do you mean?" Lina asked. "I filled out the slip. But the next morning, the evidence locker was cleaned. Shoe gone. My slip torn out of the book. Captain Rourke told me to shut up about it. Said I must have been mistaken." Lina studied him. "And you didn't push back?" He gave a humorless laugh. "Push back against Rourke? Against the brass? You think I was suicidal? I had a mortgage, 2 kids in school. Guys who asked questions back then ended up reassigned, fired, sometimes worse." He paced, hands on hips. "But I'll tell you this, that shoe wasn't just evidence. It was a message. Someone wanted it to disappear, and that meant it mattered." "Why would a child's sneaker matter?" "Because it was proof they were there," Vargas snapped. His voice softened after a beat. "You think about it, detective. A witness can vanish, sure. A man can skip town. A file can get shredded. But a kid's shoe, you can't explain that away. That shoe could have sunk the whole department if it came to trial." Lina's pulse quickened. "So where is it now?" He looked at her, eyes sharp despite his years. "Where everything else goes in this city when it's too hot to handle, buried in some cop's private stash. Or burned." She scribbled notes, her mind racing. "Do you know who took it?" His silence was answer enough. Finally, he muttered, "Check with internal affairs." Quietly. Rumor was one of their own pocketed it to keep leverage. Back then, everyone had dirt on everyone else. A shoe like that wasn't just evidence, it was currency. The drive back into the city was a blur of gray highways and rain streaking the windshield. A child's sneaker, once logged, now erased. Evidence not destroyed but traded, hidden, used as leverage. If it had passed into internal affairs hands, that meant someone still had it. And if they had kept it for decades, it wasn't just leverage anymore, it was insurance. By the time Lina reached her office, she was shaking with equal parts anger and adrenaline. She opened her laptop, pulling up archived IA rosters from the late 90s. Cross-referencing with retirement records, she built a list of names, officers who might have touched the Hale case, who might have pocketed the shoe. 6 names. She leaned back, staring at them. And then her phone rang. This time, the voice was clearer. Calm. Male. "You're looking in the wrong place," he said. Her throat tightened. "Who are you?" "A friend. Someone who doesn't want to see you end up like them." "Like who?" "The Hales, the others, everyone who thought they could shine light where it doesn't belong." Her voice sharpened. "What happened to the shoe?" A pause, then, almost kindly. "Sometimes the shoe fits someone else. Sometimes it tells a story you don't want to hear." The line went dead. That night, sleep evaded her. She lay awake, the city humming outside her window, the voice replaying in her head. Sometimes the shoe fits someone else. What did that mean? That the sneaker wasn't Emily's? That the trail she was following was bait? By dawn, she was back at her desk, dragging up crime scene photos again. She zoomed in on the surveillance footage from the lobby. Raymond, Emily, and the officer guiding them inside. Grainy as it was, Emily's sneakers were visible, white with blue stripes, identical. Her stomach twisted. What if the shoe she'd found in the basement hadn't been hers at all? What if it belonged to another child? The thought rooted in her mind, heavy as lead. The Hales might not have been the only ones erased in that basement. Lina returned to the precinct basement 2 nights later, this time with a camera, gloves, and sample kits. She needed to be sure. The air was colder than before, heavy with damp. She knelt near the chair, scraping residue from the floor into a vial, photographing every angle. Then she moved back to the wall where she had pried out the bricks. Her flashlight caught something she hadn't noticed before. Scratches, etched faintly into the mortar just below the recess. Letters. She leaned close, tracing the grooves with her finger. 3 words. Help us all. Her breath caught. The shoe hadn't been the only message. Someone, maybe Emily, maybe another child, had tried to leave a trace, a final plea carved into the wall. She snapped photos, her hands trembling. When she turned back toward the stairwell, she froze. The door at the top was closed. She hadn't closed it when she came in. The beam of her flashlight shook as she called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Her pulse roared in her ears. Slowly, she started up the steps, every creak of the metal groaning like a scream. At the top, she pushed the door open. The corridor was empty, but on the floor just outside, left deliberately where she couldn't miss it, was a Polaroid photograph. She lifted it, her stomach clenching. The picture showed the interrogation room above, the table, the mirror, and sitting in the chair, a young girl, her face blurred by time and flash burn, but her shoes clear as day. White canvas, blue stripes. The Polaroid wouldn't leave her hands. Back at her apartment, Lina set it under the brightest lamp she owned, tilting it this way and that, squinting at every detail. The gloss had dulled with age, and the colors were muted into a palette of sepia and bruised blue. But the image itself was undeniable. A girl in the interrogation room, her face washed out, blurred by the glare of the flash, but her posture, hunched, guarded, spoke of terror. Her shoes were clear, though, catching the light with ghostly precision. White canvas with blue stripes, the same as the sneaker in the evidence bag. Lina compared the two side by side, the real shoe, yellowed with years in the wall, and the Polaroid, showing a pair still on a child's feet. Was it Emily Hale, or someone else? She checked the timestamp smudged across the bottom border of the Polaroid. March 20th, 1999. 2 days after Raymond and Emily entered the precinct. Her stomach turned. 2 days. Emily hadn't been taken and killed the night she walked in with her father. She had been kept, held, in the room above the basement where the chair waited. And maybe not just her. The next morning, Lina drove to the state records office. She requested missing persons reports from the late 90s, focusing on children within the city. The clerk, unimpressed with the weight of her badge, dragged out binders heavy with dust. She set to work at a corner desk, flipping pages, scanning names. By noon, she had flagged 4 cases. Carla Ruiz, 11, vanished March 1998. Last seen walking home from school. Maya Peterson, 13, disappeared February 1999. Mother reported possible runaway, but no evidence. Anthony A.J. Brooks, 10, last seen at a community basketball game, March 1999. Emily Hale, 12, vanished March 18, 1999. Last seen entering 7th Precinct with father, 4 children, all within the span of a year. Lina laid the files side by side, her throat tight. None had been solved. Each had been reduced to cold entries in dusty folders. And now she had a Polaroid, time-stamped March 20th, 1999, showing a child in custody inside 7th Precinct. Her pen scratched across her notebook. Were the Hales the only targets, or part of something bigger? The question coiled in her gut. cold and heavy. That night, she drove to Maya Peterson's old address, a housing project on the south side, now half condemned. She knocked on the door, unsure if anyone still lived there. The woman who answered was older now, her face lined with grief that had never softened. "I'm Detective Ward," Lena said gently. "I'm reviewing cold cases." "Maya Peterson. She was your daughter?" The woman nodded, eyes wet. "No one's asked me about her in 25 years. Lena held up the Polaroid. "Do you recognize this girl?" The woman's hand shook as she took it. Her breath hitched. She pressed it to her chest like it might break. "That's her," she whispered. "That's my Maya." The room tilted around Lena. Her vision swam. It wasn't Emily in the photo. It was another girl entirely. Another child who had walked into the void. The revelation clawed at Lena all night. She paced her apartment, the files spread across the table, the Polaroid glinting under lamplight. It wasn't just the Hales, the basement, the hidden room, the erased evidence. It had all been bigger. A network of silences. She wrote the names again, one by one, the letters trembling under her pen. Carla, Maya, a J. Emily, 4 children, and if 4, how many more? The phone rang, startling her. Another unknown number. She answered. A man's voice, calm, measured. "Now you see it." Her throat closed. "Who is this?" "You think it was about Hale, about his testimony. That was convenient. A cover. But the truth was deeper. Children vanish, detective. Always have. But some vanish where no one dares to look." Her grip tightened. "Where are they?" A pause. Then, not where. Who? Ask yourself. Who benefits when files disappear? Who gains when fear keeps mouths shut? The rot was never about one man. It was systemic, woven into the badge you wear. The line clicked dead. Lena stood frozen, phone to her ear, the voice echoing inside her skull. Not where. Who? She turned back to the files. Vargas had suggested I.A. Dwyer had pointed to Rourke. Greaves had warned the rot was still alive. Who? The shoe, the Polaroid, the carved words on the wall. Help us all. They weren't just evidence of murder. They were evidence of something organized, sustained, protected. And if that protection still existed, then someone was watching her right now. The next day, she tried to find Carla Ruiz's family. The old address was gone, bulldozed for a new development, but a neighbor directed her to a shelter where Carla's brother sometimes stayed. She found him in the cafeteria, shoulders hunched, beard ragged. His eyes burned when she said Carla's name. "She didn't run away," he said fiercely. "Cops told us that, said she probably just took off. But she didn't. She wouldn't leave me, not like that." "Did she have any connection to the precinct?" Lena asked carefully. His laugh was bitter. "Connection?" They were always around. Cops in the neighborhood, pushing people, shaking down kids for info. Carla used to say she felt like she was being followed on her walk home. Like someone was waiting. Her pen scratched notes. "Do you remember what shoes she wore?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Shoes?" "Yeah, white ones, with stripes. She saved all summer to buy them. Said they made her run faster." Lena's chest caved in. Another child, another pair, the same shoes. Back at her office, she pinned the files to her board. 4 children, different neighborhoods, different backgrounds. But the pattern was clear. And the shoes, identical. White canvas, blue stripes, not coincidence, not chance, uniform. Her mind spun. Were they chosen because of the shoes? Or were the shoes planted later, a signature of whoever took them? The thought made her skin crawl. She leaned against the wall, staring at the board. The basement, the chair, the Polaroid, the missing shoe, the sealed reports. It wasn't just about Raymond Hale testifying against DeLuca. That was the story told. The surface layer. Beneath it was something darker, something that had swallowed children whole, then erased them from memory, and Lina had just cracked the door open. That night, she returned to the basement one more time. She had to be sure. The air was colder, her flashlight beam weaker. She traced the scratches on the wall again. "Help us all." Her hand brushed lower, across rough concrete. She stopped. Another mark. She angled the light. Numbers. Carved faintly into the wall. 4. Her breath caught. 4 children. Carla, Maya, Ajay, Emily. The basement wasn't just a hidden room. It was a tomb. And someone, maybe one of them, maybe not, had left behind the count. Her skin prickled. She lifted her camera, snapped photos, then turned to leave. At the base of the stairs, she froze. On the chair, dangling from the restraint, was a fresh Polaroid. Still warm. She picked it up with shaking hands. The photo showed her, in the basement, taken from the shadows. The Polaroid trembled in her hands. Her own face stared back, pale in the beam of her flashlight, frozen mid-step in the basement, her body hunched as though bracing against the walls themselves. The angle was from behind her, over her shoulder. Someone had been standing in the dark while she searched the room, close enough to hear her breathing. Lina's throat tightened. She scanned the corners with her light, but the basement was empty now. Empty except for the echo of her pulse. She shoved the Polaroid into an evidence bag, sealed it, and forced herself up the stairs. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the lock as she sealed the door behind her. Back in the car, she sat with the engine off, trying to breathe. The city hummed outside, but the world inside her vehicle felt sealed, sterile. She turned the bagged photo over and over. This wasn't just surveillance. This was a warning. "We see you. We're closer than you think." Sleep was impossible that night. Lina sat at her kitchen table with the 2 Polaroids side by side. The girl in Interrogation Room 3, time-stamped March 20th, 1999, and her own blurred image, taken just hours ago. 2 decades apart, and the film stock was the same. The borders, the texture, the way the colors bled under the flash, identical. Whoever was leaving these wasn't just sending a message. They were using the same camera. Her mind circled the implications. The Polaroids weren't relics from the past. They were part of something continuous, something still alive. The Hales hadn't been the only ones. And maybe they weren't even the last. The next day at the station, Lina buried herself in paperwork, trying to look ordinary. But she felt eyes on her, passing colleagues, a sergeant at the copy machine, even the custodian sweeping the hall. Anyone could be part of it. At lunch, she called Vargas, the retired detective who had once logged the missing shoe. "You said IA might have taken it," she pressed. "That they used evidence like currency. Who, specifically?" He sighed. "Names won't help you. They're all shadows now. Some retired, some buried, some promoted so high you'll never touch 'em. But if you're serious, and I'm telling you, don't be, then talk to Marcus Flynn." "Who's Flynn?" "IA investigator, mean bastard. Loved leverage more than law. If anybody pocketed evidence, it'd be him. Last I heard, he's at a care facility out in Bridgeport. Dementia, maybe. Or maybe that's just what they say to keep people from asking him things." Lina scribbled the name in her notebook. "Thank you." "Detective?" Vargas's voice dropped low. "If you dig Flynn up, don't do it alone. People disappear chasing this. I don't want to read about you in the obituaries." Bridgeport was an hour's drive along the coast, the highway cutting through stretches of gray water and industrial sprawl. Lina kept checking her mirrors. Every dark sedan, every motorcycle, felt like a tale. The care home sat on a hill overlooking the bay. Clean, white walls. Too clean. The kind of place families paid for to ease their guilt. Marcus Flynn was waiting in a wheelchair by the window of his room. His hair was thin and white, his skin folded and sagging. But his eyes, sharp, ice blue, tracked her as she entered. "You're Ward," he rasped before she even introduced herself. Her steps faltered. "Yes. How did you—" "You've been stirring the Hale case. Took long enough. Thought everyone had forgotten." Lena sat across from him. "You were internal affairs in '99. His smile was brittle. "I was the bastard who looked under rocks and found snakes. Trouble is, sometimes the snakes bite back." She leaned forward. "The missing shoe. Did you take it?" He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Straight to the point. I like that. Did I take it? Number." "Did I know who did?" "Yes, but you don't need the name. The name won't save you." "Then what will?" He wheeled closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Understanding the pattern. It wasn't about Hale. Hale was the excuse. The real business was older, dirtier. The shoe was proof, yes, but proof of what?" Lena's pulse raced. "What?" Flynn's gaze burned into hers. "That the children weren't collateral. They were the point." Her breath hitched. "You're saying they were targeted." "Targeted, selected, used. Call it what you want. Hale got tangled because he walked into the wrong precinct with the wrong daughter. But those other kids, Carla Ruiz, Maya Peterson, that boy, AJ, they were all fed into the same system. And the system wore a badge." Her stomach churned. "Why?" Flynn looked back out the window, the gray sea reflecting in his eyes. "Control, leverage, sometimes ritual, if you believe the whispers. Always power. The department wasn't protecting children. It was consuming them." The room tilted. "Where are they?" she demanded. His hand twitched on the chair arm. "Gone, long gone, but echoes remain. Evidence buried, photos, shoes, scratches on walls, ghosts scratching at the surface." "Who else knows?" His smile thinned. "Everyone. No one. Depends how high you climb. You keep climbing, detective, you'll find the rot runs higher than you want to believe." She opened her mouth, but he lifted a finger. "They'll come for you now. They've already marked you. The Polaroid proves it." Her blood iced. He wheeled back from the window, coughing hard, then pressed a slip of paper into her hand. A name, a number. "They called him the archivist," Flynn whispered. "If anyone still has the shoe, it's him. But Ward—" He gripped her wrist, strength surprising for his frailty. His eyes locked on hers. "Don't go looking unless you're ready to see hell." The drive back felt longer. The slip of paper burned in her pocket. The archivist. No rank, no department, just a name that sounded more myth than man. But if he held the missing shoe, the original piece of evidence erased from the system, then he held the truth. And truth was the one thing she couldn't stop chasing. Back at her apartment, Lena poured a drink she wouldn't finish. She pinned Flynn's words to her board. The children weren't collateral. They were the point. Her eyes drifted to the Polaroid of herself. Someone had been in the basement with her, watching, waiting. She replayed the moment again in her head, step by step, trying to picture where they'd stood, how close they'd been. Her skin crawled. Then she noticed something in the photo she hadn't before. A reflection in the cracked mirror behind her, faint but visible. A figure. Not enough to see a face, but enough to see the uniform. Dark fabric, the cut of a jacket, a badge glinting in the flash. Her hand went cold. It wasn't just someone watching her. It was a cop. The slip of paper felt heavier than any badge. Lena unfolded it for the 100th time, tracing the name scrawled in Flynn's trembling hand. The archivist. No rank, no title, just 2 words and a number. A local number. No address. She sat in her car outside her apartment building, debating whether to dial. Every instinct screamed caution. Flynn had been clear. The archivist wasn't someone you looked for unless you were ready to see hell. But she was already standing at the gates. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. She dialed. 1 ring, 2, 3. Then a voice. You shouldn't have this number. Low, calm, genderless in its restraint. This is Detective Lena Ward, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. I'm investigating the disappearance of Raymond and Emily Hale. I was told you might have something I need. Silence stretched. Then, Detective, you're late. You were supposed to call 20 years ago. The line clicked dead. She barely slept. By dawn, her walls were covered with names, photographs, strings of connection. Hale, Emily, Carla, Maya, a J. Rourke, Dwyer, Vargas, Flynn, and now the archivist. At 7 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. If you want the shoe, come alone. Warehouse District, Pier 19, midnight. No signature. Her pulse surged. The shoe. The missing second sneaker, the piece of evidence stolen from the chain of custody 2 decades ago. If it was real, it could break the silence wide open. If it was a trap, she might never crawl back out. The hours until midnight dragged like chains. She went through her routine as if under surveillance, which, she reminded herself, she likely was. No sudden movements. No calls that would draw suspicion. She shredded notes she couldn't afford to lose and hid copies in her car, tucked into a panel beneath the dashboard. By the time she pulled into the warehouse district, the streets were deserted. The air reeked of brine and diesel. Pier 19 loomed at the water's edge, a corrugated steel warehouse with windows punched out like missing teeth. She killed her headlights and approached on foot, flashlight in one hand, her other resting near the holster she wasn't technically authorized to use off-duty. Inside, the warehouse was a cathedral of rust. Moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, striping the concrete floor in silver and shadow. At the center, lit only by a single hanging bulb, sat a wooden crate. She moved closer, her breath sharp in the silence. The crate was open. Inside, on a bed of yellowed newspaper, lay a child's sneaker. White canvas, blue stripes. Her heart pounded. She lifted it carefully, sliding it into an evidence bag. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the certainty that she now held a piece of history erased by force. The sound of clapping broke the silence. Slow, measured. Her flashlight swung. A figure stepped from the shadows, face obscured by the brim of a cap. Their voice carried, low and deliberate. Well done, detective. You found your relic. Now ask yourself, why was it left here for you to find? Her grip tightened. You're the archivist. A chuckle. Names don't matter. Stories do. And you've just picked up a story that could bring down half a city. But you'll never tell it. Not the way you think. Why not? Because truth is never free. It comes with a cost. And most people can't pay it. Her throat tightened. Where are the children? The figure tilted their head. You still think this was about children. Sweet, noble. But children were only the language. The message. The way power spoke to power. What does that mean? They stepped closer, the light catching just enough to reveal a sliver of jaw, a shadow of a smile. Ask your own house, detective. Look inward. Every precinct has its foundation. Some are built on stone, yours on bones. Her pulse raced. Who are you working for? The archivist's smile deepened. I don't work for, I work with. That's the difference between surviving and being a ghost on a wall. Learn it fast, or you'll join the children you pity. And with that, they turned, vanishing into the shadows. Lena lunged forward, but the sound of footsteps faded into silence, leaving her alone with the dangling bulb and the bagged sneaker clutched tight in her hands. Back in her car, she laid the two shoes side by side, the one she had pulled from the basement wall and the one gifted by the archivist. Both identical, both weathered. But one detail struck her cold. The second shoe was cleaner, preserved. As if it hadn't been hidden for 20 years, but kept, curated, cared for. A trophy. Her stomach turned. This wasn't just evidence. It was possession. And now, somehow, it was hers. The next day at the station, whispers followed her. She felt them on her back, in the corners of her vision. Her supervisor pulled her aside, brows furrowed. "Ward, what are you working on?" "Cold case review," she said evenly. "You've been logging unusual hours, visiting old facilities, showing up on surveillance in places you're not supposed to be." Her blood iced. They were watching more closely than she thought. "I'm just following leads," she said. He studied her a moment, then lowered his voice. "Careful. Some leads bite back. You're not the first detective to chase ghosts. Don't be the next to vanish." That evening, she pinned the second shoe to her board. Side by side, they seemed to pulse. Relics of children silenced and forgotten. But as she stared, one thought gnawed at her. If the archivist had the shoe, what else did they have? What other trophies? And what would it take to make them give up the rest? Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. This time, a photo message. She opened it. The image showed her apartment window, taken from the street below. The caption, "Truth is watching." The photo glowed on her phone screen long after she set it down. Her apartment window, captured from the street, curtains half drawn, her own silhouette faintly visible inside. Whoever had taken it had been close enough to see her, close enough to know she was home. Truth wasn't just watching. It was breathing down her neck. She swept the apartment 3 times before dawn, checking locks, blinds, corners where shadows pooled. Nothing, no footprints on the balcony, no scratches on the door, no sign of a break-in. But absence was no comfort. Absence meant skill. By the time the sun rose, Lena sat at her kitchen table, staring at the 2 shoes in their evidence bags. The archivist had wanted her to have them. Why? Not to help her. To bait her. She opened her notebook and underlined a single word. Inside. If the basement, the Polaroids, the children, if all of it was protected for 2 decades, then someone inside the department was ensuring it stayed buried. And if the archivist had access to her apartment window, maybe they weren't outside the department at all. Maybe they still wore a badge. At the station, she pulled personnel files again. She narrowed her search. Officers who had been in the 7th Precinct in 1999 and were still on the force today. The list shrank to 5 names. 5 men who had survived transfers, promotions, scandals. 5 men who had built entire careers in the years since the Hales disappeared. One name stood out. Deputy Chief Alan Kerr. Kerr had been a lieutenant back in '99. His name appeared only once in the Hale file, barely a footnote, logged as being off-site. Yet later, his signature appeared approving final case summaries. He had signed the file that declared Raymond and Emily Hale unlocated, presumed missing. And now he was second in command of the entire department. Her chest tightened. If Kerr had survived, risen, thrived, what else had he carried with him? That evening she attended a department fundraiser, one of the glittering galas where brass paraded their medals and shook hands with city officials. She wasn't invited, but she knew the uniform was armor. No one questioned a detective walking among polished shoes and champagne flutes. Kerr was easy to spot. Tall, silver hair cut sharp, his suit tailored so tight it could have been armor. He stood near the dais, laughing too loudly at a councilman's joke. Lena watched him from across the room, every instinct prickling. She saw how others deferred, how conversations bent toward him. Kerr wasn't just part of the system. He was the system. She approached when his glass was empty. "Deputy Chief." She offered a polite smile. "Detective Lena Ward, Major Crimes Review." His eyes flicked over her, calculating in an instant. "Ah, one of our cold case bloodhounds. Good work you all do. Keeps the past tidy." Her smile held, brittle. I'm reviewing the Hale disappearance. Your name's in the file. Something flickered in his eyes. Gone as fast as it came. Is it? Must have been a busy time. Hard to remember every case. You signed the summary, she pressed. He sipped his drink. Then I must have believed the summary. Missing persons happens every day in this city. Children don't vanish from police stations every day, she said quietly. His smile froze. For a fraction of a second, his eyes hardened into steel. Then the charm returned. Careful, detective, he said softly, leaning just close enough that no one else could hear. The past is like quicksand. Step too far in and you'll never climb out. Her throat tightened. Are you warning me? He tapped his empty glass against the table, his smile never faltering. I'm giving you advice. There's a difference. Then he turned away, his laughter booming again as if their conversation had never happened. That night, Lena drove without thinking, streets blurring past, the city lights smearing into streaks. Kerr's words echoed inside her head. The past is like quicksand. She ended up back at Pier 19, staring at the warehouse where the archivist had left her the second shoe. The crate was gone now. The bulb still dangled from the ceiling, swaying slightly in the draft. On the floor, in the dust where the crate had stood, someone had scrawled a message with chalk. Ask Kerr about AJ. Her pulse stopped. A J. Brooks, 10 years old. Disappeared March 1999. She snapped a photo, the chalk letters glowing ghostly under her flashlight. The archivist wasn't done with her. They were feeding her, breadcrumbing her deeper into the rot. The next morning, Lena pulled AJ Brooks' file. He had been last seen at a community basketball game. Witnesses reported a police officer escorting him away after the game ended, claiming his parents had called. But no officer name was listed. No badge number. Just one vague line. Escorted by authority figure. Her stomach twisted. She checked the witness statement again. A single line stood out, overlooked for 2 decades. The officer was tall, with silver hair. Her pen dropped. Alan Kerr. That evening, Lena returned home to find her door unlocked. She froze in the hallway, hand hovering near her holster. She pushed the door open. Her apartment looked untouched. Nothing broken, nothing stolen. On the table, between the 2 bagged shoes, lay another Polaroid. Her blood ran cold. The photo showed a boy in a basketball jersey, sitting in the chair in the basement. His eyes were wide, wet, pleading. His sneakers gleamed white with blue stripes. On the back, scrawled in ink, a J. Ask Kerr. The Polaroid of AJ burned through Lena's fingertips like it carried heat. His face, terrified, helpless, already resigned, stared back at her from 26 years ago. The boy was gone, but his fear remained preserved on film, waiting to surface. She pinned the photo to her board beside the others. The pattern stared back at her now with merciless clarity. The shoes, the missing children, the sealed basement, the altered reports. And at the center of it all, Deputy Chief Alan Kerr. He wasn't just another name on a dusty roster. He had touched every part of the Hale file, signed every summary, silenced every question. And now the archivist was daring her to confront him, leaving her breadcrumbs written in chalk and Polaroids, fresh from shadows. But why? Was the archivist trying to help her, or bait her into the same grave as the others? The next morning, Lena requested a quiet meeting with Sergeant Cole, an analyst she trusted in records. She slid the A.J. Brooks file across his desk. I need everything you can dig up on Kerr's assignments around March of '99. Patrol logs, sign-in sheets, disciplinary notes. Anything. Cole raised a brow. You know who you're asking about, right? I know, she said. That's why I'm asking. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Ward, Kerr's untouchable. People who poke that bear end up transferred to traffic, or worse. Then don't log the request, Lena pressed. Don't leave a trail. Just check. His hesitation stretched. Then he nodded, sliding the file back. "I'll see what I can do, but if this comes back on me, it won't." She left before he could change his mind, her pulse racing. That evening she drove to A.J. Brooks's old neighborhood. The playground where he had last been seen was rusted now, swings creaking in the wind. A mural of lost children had been painted on the wall of the rec center, faces fading with time, colors running from rain. She found A.J.'s mother in a small apartment a few blocks away. Her hair was gray now, her eyes dulled by years of unanswered questions. When Lena showed her the Polaroid, the woman's hands trembled. "That's him," she whispered. "That's my boy." Lena's throat tightened. "Do you remember the officer who took him that night?" The woman closed her eyes, tears cutting lines down her cheeks. "They said it was someone official, that he was safe, but I never saw him again, and the cops told me to stop asking." "Did anyone ever mention Kerr?" The woman frowned faintly. "Tall man, silver hair, smiled too much. I saw him at the station once when I went to beg for answers. He said my boy must have run away." Her voice broke. "But A.J. didn't run. He was 10. He still slept with the light on." Lena squeezed her hand gently. "I believe you." And for the first time, the woman's eyes lit with something fragile, relief, or maybe just recognition that someone was finally listening. When Lena returned to her car, her phone buzzed with a message from Cole. "Got something. Kerr's log, March 18th to 20th, 1999. Listed off-site, but car mileage suggests he was at 7th Precinct both nights. Doesn't add up." Her stomach clenched. Kerr had lied. Not only was he on duty, he had been at the very precinct where the children vanished, and his signature had sealed the file that erased them. She spent the next day tailing Kerr. He left his office at dusk, sliding into a black sedan with tinted windows. Lena followed at a careful distance, headlights dimmed, heart hammering. He didn't head home. He didn't head to dinner. He drove across town to the waterfront, pulling into an abandoned dockyard. Lena killed her engine a block away, slipping into the shadows on foot. Kerr stepped out of his car, meeting another man under a broken floodlight. Their voices carried faintly on the wind. "Can't keep this buried forever," the other man said. Kerr's reply was sharp, guttural. "It's already buried. The girl digging won't get far. She doesn't know the half of it." The girl. Her. Lena pressed against the rusted frame of a shipping container, forcing her breath shallow. The men exchanged a small object. She squinted. The size of a cassette tape, old and battered. Kerr slipped it into his jacket. "Insurance," the other man muttered. Kerr nodded once, then turned back toward his car. Lena ducked low, waiting until the sound of engines faded before stepping into the circle of lamplight. The dock was empty now. The wind whipped against the water, carrying the sour stink of brine. Her notebook trembled in her hand as she wrote one word: tape. That night, she couldn't shake the image. Kerr carrying not just secrets, but recordings. Proof, evidence, insurance he could use against allies and enemies alike. If that cassette contained what she thought it might, testimonies, confessions, maybe even recordings from the basement, it could blow the case wide open. But how to get it? Her phone buzzed. Another text. Unlisted number. Nice tale. Sloppy exit. Next time, he'll see you. Her pulse spiked. The archivist. She typed back before she could stop herself. "What's on the tape?" The reply came instantly. The screams. Her blood ran cold. She typed again. "Where does he keep it?" No reply. Just silence. The next day, Lena tried to confront Kerr directly. She requested a meeting under the guise of discussing cold case resources. He welcomed her into his office with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Detective Ward, always working. That's good. Work keeps the mind from wandering." She sat across from him, steadying her voice. "Deputy Chief, I've found inconsistencies in the Hale file, and now A.J. Brooks. You were logged off-site, but evidence suggests you were at 7th Precinct those nights. His smile sharpened. Suggests? Your car mileage doesn't match your logs. He leaned back, folding his hands. Detective, do you know how many lives I've buried in reports over the years? How many mothers cried at my desk? Do you know what happens when you carry all that weight too long? You start confusing paperwork with ghosts. Her pulse thudded in her ears. What's on the tape? For the first time, his expression cracked. Just slightly. A flicker of recognition, then fury. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. You should stop, Ward. You should stop before you end up like them. She held his gaze. Like who? His smile returned, colder than before. The ones who wore the shoes. Lena drove until the city lights thinned into stretches of empty road. She kept the window cracked, letting cold air sting her skin, trying to cool the fire that Kerr's words had lit in her chest. The ones who wore the shoes. He had said it like a curse, like a reminder. She pulled over at an overlook where the river cut black through the city. The water reflected nothing, swallowing light whole. The files on her passenger seat glowed faintly in the dashboard spill. 4 children, 4 pairs of shoes, and maybe more, hidden still. Her phone buzzed, a message. Same number as before. If you want the tape, bring both shoes. Pier 12, tomorrow, midnight. Her breath caught. The archivist again. The shoes had always been more than relics. They were currency. Now she was being told to trade them. But could she risk handing over the only physical proof she had? She sat there until her coffee went cold, staring at the water. Every choice felt like walking a tightrope with no net. By morning, exhaustion dragged at her. She sat in the records office with Sergeant Cole, who looked even more worn down than she did. I pulled everything I could on Kerr, he said, sliding a file across the desk. You're not going to like it. She flipped it open. Property transactions, land deeds, warehouse leases, all tied to Kerr, specifically the dockyard where she had tailed him. Jesus, she muttered. He owns the ground they buried this on. Cole lowered his voice. Ward, I don't know what you're chasing, but you're kicking a hornet's nest. If Kerr's really tied to those disappearances, if he's sitting on evidence, you can't bring this through official channels. It'll die before it leaves your desk. She rubbed her temple. Then I'll bring it somewhere else. He frowned. Where? She didn't answer. Because she didn't know. That evening, she set the 2 shoes on her kitchen table. They looked almost innocent under the lamp, as if they belonged on a shelf in a thrift store instead of sealed in evidence bags. One had been pulled from a wall. One had been handed to her by a phantom. Together, they told a story the city had spent 26 years trying to erase. But who would believe it without the tape? She stared at the shoes until the clock read 11:30. Then she packed them into a satchel, slid her recorder into her pocket, and left. Pier 12 was darker than Pier 19. The warehouses here leaned like skeletons, windows shattered, gulls shrieking overhead. At midnight, the air was thick with fog. Her footsteps echoed on the concrete as she moved toward the single-lit bulb swinging over the dock. The archivist stood in its circle. Tonight, their face wasn't shadowed. A man, late 50s, sharp jaw, hair cropped close. His coat hung long, pockets deep. His eyes gleamed like someone who had seen too much and cataloged every detail. He smiled faintly when he saw the satchel. You brought them. She tightened her grip. Where's the tape? Not so fast. His voice was calm, almost tender. Let me see them first. Her pulse thundered. Slowly, she pulled the shoes from the bag, keeping them sealed. The archivist's eyes lit, hungry, reverent. Perfect. I kept one safe for decades. You found the other, together again, after all these years. You kept it, Lena said. You, not Kerr. I'm the keeper, he said softly. The witness who doesn't testify, the voice that doesn't echo. I collect what others bury. Her throat tightened. And the tape. He reached into his coat. Her breath caught. He held out a cassette, its label worn, the plastic cracked at one corner. "The night it happened," he said. "Recorded from the observation room. Audio only. You'll hear the truth. You'll hear the children." Her hands trembled as she reached for it. But before she touched it, he pulled it back. "One condition. The shoes stay with me." Her pulse surged. "Number their evidence." He shook his head gently. "Their memory. And memory belongs with me." She stepped closer, forcing her voice steady. "If you want these shoes, you'll give me the tape. Now." For a long moment, he studied her. Then he smiled. "You remind me of Hale," he said. "Brave, foolish." He placed the tape in her palm. The shoes slid from her grip into his hands. Transaction complete. Back in her car, Lila set the tape on the passenger seat. Her recorder was still running in her pocket, capturing every word of the exchange. Her hands shook as she started the engine. She didn't see the figure until it stepped into her headlights. Alan Kerr. He stood in the middle of the pier road, silver hair gleaming, his face cold as stone. Her tires screeched as she braked. Kerr walked forward slowly, hands in his pockets. "Detective Ward," he said, his voice carrying over the engine. "You've been busy." Her heart slammed against her ribs. He glanced at the passenger seat, at the cassette resting there. His smile thinned. "You really think you're holding truth in plastic? Truth doesn't live on tape. Truth lives in silence, in the stories people stop telling." She tightened her grip on the wheel. Kerr leaned down, his face filling her window. His eyes were sharp, merciless. "Be careful where you play that," he whispered. "Some voices should stay buried." Then he stepped back, vanishing into the fog as suddenly as he had appeared. Lila drove off, her pulse still in her throat, the cassette rattling faintly against the seat. At 3 a.m., in the safety of her apartment, she dug out an old cassette player from a storage box. She slid the tape in, pressed play. Static hissed, then voices. A man's voice, firm, commanding. Kerr, another man, pleading. Raymond Hale. And faintly, in the background, a girl crying. Emily. Lena's hands shook as she listened. Kerr's voice again, colder now. "You should have stayed quiet, Ray. You should have kept her out of it." Raymond. "Please, she's just a child." Emily, sobbing. Then a sound, metal scraping, chains rattling, and a scream so raw it sliced through the static like glass. Lila ripped the headphones off, her chest heaving. The tape spun on. And then, silence, followed by the sound of a door closing, and Kerr's voice, calm, steady, final. "No one will ever know." The tape clicked, word, and ended. The tape lay on the table like a relic, humming silence into her apartment. Lila hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Emily's sobs and Raymond's pleas, followed by Kerr's steady voice. No one will ever know. But now she knew, and knowing made her a threat. By dawn, she had replayed the cassette twice more, forcing herself to listen to every detail. The scrape of chairs, the faint shuffle of feet, the low hum of a fluorescent light. The sound wasn't just evidence. It was presence. Proof that the basement wasn't a rumor, that the children had been kept alive before they were silenced. Proof that Kerr had overseen it. She stared at the shoes pinned above her board, the Polaroids taped beside them. The narrative was complete now. Children selected, disappeared, hidden beneath a precinct designed to protect them. Hale caught in the machinery. Kerr climbing the ladder. But narrative wasn't enough. She needed to decide. Take the tape to internal affairs, leak it to the press, or bury it like everyone else before her. Her phone buzzed before she could choose. A text, no sender ID. If you play the tape, you die. Her stomach clenched. She set the phone down with deliberate care, as though sudden movement might trigger something unseen. The room felt smaller now. Every window a lens. Every corner a watcher. At the station, she carried the cassette in her satchel, trying not to let the weight of it change her stride. She passed Kerr in the hallway. His eyes flicked to her bag, then to her face. A smile ghosted across his lips. "Long night?" he asked smoothly. She didn't answer. He leaned close, his voice barely audible. "You can play it, detective. But ask yourself, who will believe you? Who will still be alive to testify?" Her chest tightened. He walked on, his shoes clicking against tile, leaving her rooted to the spot. That afternoon, she met Cole in the records room. She slid the tape across the table. He stared at it like it might explode. "Is this what I think it is?" "Yes." Her voice cracked. "It's them. Hale, Emily, Kerr, everything." He pushed it back toward her. "Ward, if this is real, it's a death warrant. You turn this in, it disappears. You leak it, you disappear. Then what do I do?" His jaw tightened. "You survive. You keep it quiet. Use it only if you have no choice. That's what everyone else has done." She shook her head, anger rising hot. "That's why children vanished. That's why Hale died, because everyone else stayed quiet." Cole's eyes were tired. "And maybe that's why you'll die too." That night, she drove to the river. She parked by the same overlook where she had first received the archivist's text. The tape sat on the passenger seat, whispering like a loaded gun. She thought of Maya's mother clutching the Polaroid, AJ's mother whispering that he still needed a nightlight, Carla's brother insisting she would never run away. All of them had been waiting 20 years for someone to listen. If she stayed quiet, she was no better than Kerr. If she spoke, she might not live long enough to speak twice. Her phone buzzed. Another message. "We warned you. The past eats its own." And below it, a photo. Her apartment door, open. Lina drove back fast, siren silent in her chest. She entered with her weapon drawn, every nerve screaming. The apartment was empty. Nothing taken, nothing broken, except the board. Her photos, her notes, the shoes, all gone. In their place, taped to the wall, was another Polaroid. Her, asleep at her desk. She stared at it until her knees weakened. Whoever had taken it had stood close enough to hear her breathing, closer than the basement, closer than the pier, inside her home. She sank onto the floor, clutching the tape to her chest. It was all she had left. The next morning, she drove to a contact at the city paper, an investigative journalist she trusted, one who had been chasing corruption long before Lina wore a badge. He listened as she laid the cassette on his desk, her voice shaking. "This is it," she said. "This proves everything. Kerr, the disappearances, the basement, the children." He slid on headphones, pressed play. She watched his face pale as the screams echoed through the tape. When it ended, he pulled the headphones off, eyes wide. "Jesus Christ, Ward. If this is real, it's real." He sat back, running a hand through his hair. "This could burn the department to the ground, but if we publish it without corroboration, they'll bury it, and us. We need more. We need bodies, documents, names that survived." Her chest tightened. "The archivist, he has more." The journalist frowned. "Then you find him again, and bring me everything. Until then, this tape doesn't exist." That night, Lina drove home through empty streets, the city quiet as if holding its breath. She parked, climbed the stairs, unlocked her door. On her kitchen table, where the tape should have been safe in her bag, lay another Polaroid. She froze. It showed the journalist, slumped in his chair, a hand on his shoulder. Alan Kerr's. The Polaroid lay on her kitchen table like a death notice. The journalist, slumped in his chair. Kerr's hand gripping his shoulder. Lina couldn't breathe. She wanted to call him, to hear his voice, to prove it was staged. But deep down, she knew better. Polaroids weren't threats. They were documentation. They were truth, framed in silence. The city would find him tomorrow, she thought. A heart attack, a fall, something tidy, something that left no trail but fear. And she would be next. Her apartment was no longer safe. The department was poison. Her contacts were compromised. All she had was the tape and the archivist. She drove without headlights, weaving through back streets until she reached the river again. The fog clung low, wrapping the docks like gauze. She parked at Pier 19, the last place she had seen the archivist, and stepped out with the tape in her pocket. "Show yourself," she whispered into the night. The fog shifted, and then he was there, leaning against a pillar, his long coat dragging the damp concrete. "You brought death to your doorstep," he said softly. Her throat burned. "You gave me the tape. You wanted this." "I wanted you to see," the archivist said. "Seeing is not the same as surviving." She stepped closer. "The journalist is dead. Kerr killed him. He'll come for me next. I need more. Something that can't be erased." The archivist's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "And if I give it to you, what will you do?" "I'll burn him down." Her voice shook. "I'll drag the whole system with him if I have to." He studied her, long and silent. Then he slipped a small envelope from his coat and dropped it on the ground between them. Inside were photographs. Not Polaroids this time, but crime scene stills. Children's belongings cataloged and stored. Shoes, bracelets, a backpack with AJ's initials stitched inside. Lena's vision blurred. "Where did you get these?" "I told you," the archivist said. "I collect what others bury." Her hands trembled as she thumbed through the photos. Enough evidence to prove this wasn't one case. It was a system, a ritual, a machine that had eaten children for years and left no bones. She looked up. "Help me take him down." The archivist shook his head. "That's not my role. My role is to keep memory alive when power tries to kill it. What you do with it, that's on you." By dawn, Lena had spread the photos and the tape across her table. She stared at them like pieces of a weapon she had no idea how to fire. She knew Kerr would move against her now. She couldn't go through official channels. Every door would close before she got a word out. But the press was already poisoned. The journalist silenced. She thought of the mothers she'd met. Maya's, Ajay's, Carla's brother. All still living, all still carrying the weight. If she couldn't take this to the system, maybe she could take it to the people. She packed the tape, the photos, the Polaroids into a bag. She left her badge behind on the counter. And she drove. The community hall smelled of dust and coffee. Folding chairs squeaked as they filled with families, neighbors, reporters who still dared to write without permission. Lena stood at the front, her hands trembling as she placed the tape recorder on the podium. "I'm Detective Lena Ward," she began, her voice hoarse. "And I have something you need to hear." The room hushed. She pressed play. Static hissed, then Hale's voice filled the air. Pleading, Emily crying, Kerr's cold command. The scream that followed cracked through the hall like lightning. Mothers covered their mouths, men bowed their heads, reporters scribbled furiously. When it ended, silence hung heavy. Then a voice from the back. "My God, they killed them!" Lena held up the photos. "Not just them, others, Carla Ruiz, Maya Peterson, Ajay Brooks. These children were taken, not by strangers, by the people sworn to protect them." Gasps, shouts, reporters snapping photos. She felt her chest lift. For the first time, the silence was breaking. But outside, the street was already filling with cruisers. Kerr stepped from the first car, his silver hair sharp against the morning light. He walked slowly, deliberately, his smile calm as if greeting an old friend. "Detective Ward," he called, his voice carrying. What a performance. But it's over now. Hand it over. Lena stood her ground, the tape recorder still spinning in her hand. The families pressed closer around her, a wall of bodies. Mothers with trembling fists, brothers with clenched jaws. No, Lena said. Her voice was steady now. It's just beginning. Kerr's smile thinned. You think they'll protect you? You think a crowd can stop what's already in motion? She held his gaze. You can kill me. You can bury every tape, every shoe, every Polaroid. But you can't unhear what they just heard. You can't unsee what they just saw. It's out now, and it's not going back in. The crowd erupted. Shouts, cries, phones raised, cameras flashing. Kerr's mask cracked, fury flashing in his eyes. For the first time, Lena saw fear beneath the silver veneer. He turned, barking orders at his men. But hesitation rippled through them. They had heard the tape too. They had seen the photos. And hesitation was all it took. The crowd surged, cameras clicked, reporters streamed live, and Kerr's empire of silence began to crumble. That night, Lena sat in a motel room on the edge of the city. The shoes were gone now, left with the archivist, whose role was never to fight, but to keep. The tape was copied, spread across newsrooms, servers, inboxes. It couldn't be buried anymore. But she knew the fight wasn't over. The system was bigger than Kerr. He was one face of it, one man who had risen on bones. Others still lurked, waiting, watching. She looked at the last Polaroid she had kept. Herself in the basement, flashlight cutting the dark. A reminder that she was no longer an investigator. She was part of the story now. And stories don't end. They echo. Rain fell again the night the city buried Alan Kerr's career. He hadn't been arrested, not yet. Men like Kerr didn't wear handcuffs easily. But the tape had cracked something in the foundation, and once cracks spread, the whole structure trembled. The morning papers carried headlines in thick black font. Cold case explodes, deputy chief implicated in disappearances. New evidence emerges in 1999, Hale mystery. Police department faces darkest hour. The mayor's office called it an isolated tragedy. The commissioner promised swift investigation. And the public, for the first time in 2 decades, whispered the names of the children again. Carla, Maya, J. Emily. The names no one was supposed to remember. Lena didn't attend the press conferences. She stayed in the motel room, curtains drawn, a pistol within arm's reach. Every time a car slowed outside, her heart hammered. Every time footsteps passed her door, she held her breath. The archivist had been right. Seeing wasn't the same as surviving. The department was fracturing, but that made it more dangerous. Some wanted to save themselves, others to protect what was left. And still, others would rather kill than confess. She lived in the space between fear and resolve. The shoes were gone now, returned to the archivist. She hadn't asked where he would keep them. She suspected she didn't want to know. The tape was duplicated, distributed, impossible to erase completely. But she knew one truth the newspapers didn't print. The tape had ended abruptly. There had been more. Another voice, faint, barely audible under the static. A whisper, not Raymond, not Emily, not Kerr. A child's voice, different. Carla, Maya, AJ, or someone else. Just one word, drawn out like breath. 5. She replayed that moment in her head again and again. The basement wall had been carved with the number 4. The 4 children she had traced. But the voice on the tape had said 5. 5 children. 1 still unaccounted for. Her chest tightened. If there had been another, where were they now? Buried with the rest? Hidden in a different file? Or still alive? Somewhere in the machinery Kerr had built? She couldn't stop asking, and that meant she couldn't stop digging. Weeks later, she returned to the 7th precinct one last time. The building was being gutted for redevelopment, Construction crews tearing out the old walls. She walked through the empty corridors, the smell of sawdust and bleach covering the rot that had once lived here. The basement had been sealed again, the stairs filled with cement. But memory didn't need walls. She stood where interrogation room 3 had once been and closed her eyes. She could still hear the tape, the scrape of chairs, the chains rattling, the scream. She whispered the names to the empty air. Carla, Maya, Ajay, Emily, and then softly, who was 5? The silence didn't answer, but silence never stayed silent forever. As she left, she noticed something near the boarded front door, a slip of paper wedged under the frame, damp from the rain. She bent to pick it up, a Polaroid, fresh. The photo showed the gutted basement, the chair gone, the walls raw with new cement. And in the corner, barely visible in the grain of the film, a child's shadow. The back of the photo carried 2 words, still waiting. That night, Lena sat on the motel bed, the Polaroid between her hands. The city outside roared with traffic and sirens, but all she heard was the faint whisper on the tape. 5. She realized then that her story with the Hales wasn't finished. Kerr was only one face of a hydra, one man who had profited from silence. There were others. The archivist would keep his trophies. The city would write headlines. Families would keep mourning, and Lena would keep digging, because the 5th child was still waiting, and waiting children deserved to be found.